Tell me that old man is not our last option. Ethan Cole's voice cut across the flight line as the dead Black Hawk sat under the hard white glare of the afternoon sun, its rotor blades hanging motionless above the olive-drab fuselage. 37 minutes remained before Raven 27 was scheduled to lift off for the largest night rescue exercise Fort Calder had hosted in 5 years, and the aircraft had already failed to start 6 times. Around it, 12 technicians moved between open panels, rolling tool chests, and 3 diagnostic laptops glowing beneath canvas shades. Every screen offered a different theory. None offered an answer. Captain Ryan Maddox stood near the nose with a headset pressed against one ear, listening as operations demanded another status update. His jaw tightened. Across the concrete, beyond the yellow safety line, Walter Mercer watched without moving. He was 76, lean beneath a faded field jacket, with silver hair cut close and a face weathered by sun, wind, and years he did not discuss. One hand rested inside his coat pocket. The edge of an old leather flight glove showed beneath the zipper, blackened across the palm and burned almost through at the index finger. Ethan noticed it and laughed. "What is that supposed to be, sir? Your emergency repair kit?" 2 technicians glanced over. One smiled. Walt did not. He kept his eyes on the helicopter. A technician inside the cockpit called clear, then turned the starter switch. A dry metallic click snapped through the warm air. Silence followed. Then came a second click, softer and late by less than a heartbeat. Walt tilted his head. The others looked at their screens. He looked at the aircraft as though it had spoken directly to him. "Battery voltage is holding," Ethan said, tapping his tablet. "Starter relay tested clean. Fuel control is within limits. The computer says the system should engage." Walt's pale eyes shifted toward him. "But it doesn't." Ethan gave a humorless smile. "Thank you for that breakthrough." Captain Maddox pulled off his headset and strode toward them. "Cole, I need a solution, not commentary. We lose this aircraft, we lose the exercise." Beyond the hangars, 2 medical crews waited beside lit ambulances. A rescue team stood in full gear near the loading zone. Farther down the runway, transport aircraft shimmered behind waves of heat. Everything was ready except Raven 27. Ethan pointed toward an open equipment case. "We replace the control module. 25 minutes if nothing fights us." "It isn't the module," Walt said. The words were quiet, almost swallowed by the distant hum of another helicopter. Ethan turned slowly. "You haven't touched the aircraft. Didn't need to. You haven't checked the data." "I heard it." That brought another laugh, sharper than the first. Ethan folded his arms. "You heard a Black Hawk explain its problem?" Walt stepped closer to the yellow line but did not cross it. Wind stirred his jacket, exposing more of the burned glove in his pocket. His gaze remained fixed on the panel below the engine housing. "I heard the first relay close. I heard the load shift. Then I heard the ground drop before the second relay caught." Ethan shook his head. "Continuity is perfect. While she's standing still." For the first time, the youngest technician, Specialist Noah Bennett, looked away from his laptop. He had heard the delay too, though he had not known what it meant. Walt studied the aircraft for another long second, then looked at Ethan. "Your computer is waiting for a fault code." His voice carried no anger, only certainty worn smooth by time. "That machine is already telling you what's wrong." Ethan glanced at the burned glove and smirked. "And I suppose you're the only one here who can understand it." Walt's eyes returned to Raven 27. "No," he said. "I'm the only one here who bothered to listen." Captain Ryan Maddox stared at Walt for a moment, then turned toward Ethan Cole. "Run the sequence again." Ethan's expression tightened. "Captain, we already have 6 failed starts recorded." "Then make it 7. The order carried across the concrete with enough weight to silence the nearby technicians. Ethan gave a short nod and motioned toward the cockpit. Noah Bennett slipped into the right seat, adjusted the headset over his ears, and rested one hand near the starter. Controls. Walt remained outside the yellow line. He did not ask to approach the aircraft. He only watched the open panel beneath the engine housing and listened as the flight line settled around him. The distant whine of a turbine faded near the far hangar. A flag above operations snapped once in the dry wind. Captain Maddox raised his hand. Clear to start. Noah turned the switch. The first relay closed with a firm metallic click. A faint tremor passed through the fuselage. The second click came late, almost too late to notice, followed by a thin electrical hum that died before the starter could engage. Walt's gaze dropped to the concrete beneath the aircraft. A few grains of dark material had fallen near the left landing gear. He stepped closer to the line and crouched, his knees moving carefully. He reached down, picked up one grain, and rubbed it between his thumb and forefinger. It broke apart like dry charcoal. What is it? Noah asked through the open cockpit door. Ethan answered before Walt could speak. Old insulation. Dirt. Nothing related to the start circuit. Walt lifted the black residue toward the light. Not dirt. He smelled it, then let the fragments fall from his fingers. Heat-aged rubber. Ethan tapped the diagnostic display. There is no heat warning in that section. There would not be. Walt straightened slowly. The engine never ran long enough to create one. Captain Maddox glanced toward the countdown clock mounted outside the maintenance bay. 31 minutes remained. Where did it come from? Walt pointed beneath the body of the helicopter. Rotor brake line support. Or the sleeve around the ground lead beside it. Ethan's patience broke into a sharp exhale. The ground lead passed inspection this morning. Resistance was almost zero. With no load. You keep saying that like it changes the test. It changes everything. Walt's voice stayed level. He looked toward the Black Hawk, not Ethan. Metal expands. Rubber softens. A cable shifts when the frame takes torque. A connection can look perfect while the aircraft is quiet and open the instant she tries to wake up. Noah leaned toward the cockpit window. That would explain why. The first relay closes. Walt nodded once. And why the second one arrives late. Ethan moved between them. Or the control module is failing intermittently, which is what the diagnostic tree indicates. We replace it, clear the fault, and move on. What fault? Walt asked. Ethan turned his tablet around. 3 green status bars filled the screen. Beneath them, a message read no confirmed failure. For one brief second, nobody spoke. Captain Maddox looked from the tablet to the silent aircraft. How long to inspect the ground lead? 10 minutes, Noah said. Ethan shook his head. Closer to 15 if we remove the panel correctly. That leaves no time for the module. Walt studied the bolts around the access plate. Their polished heads caught the sunlight with a cold steel glare. You do not need to remove the whole panel. Ethan gave him a flat look. And you know that because? Because whoever serviced it last used the wrong forward washer. The plate is sitting less than 1/8 of an inch high on the lower edge. Noah climbed down from the cockpit and walked over. He crouched beside the panel, ran one finger along the seam, and stopped. The gap was almost invisible, but it was there. Ethan's confident expression shifted by the smallest degree. Captain Maddox noticed. Coal. Ethan knelt and examined the edge himself. It is within tolerance. Maybe, Walt said. Until the frame twists. The countdown changed to 30 minutes. Ethan rose and brushed dust from his knees. Captain, I strongly recommend we follow the approved procedure. Maddox looked at the dead Black Hawk, then at the old man standing beyond the line. And I strongly recommend, he said, that someone tell me why Walter Mercer knew about that gap before any of you did. Captain Ryan Maddox held Walt's gaze, waiting for an answer, but the old man offered none. He stood beyond the yellow line with the afternoon wind pressing his faded field jacket against his narrow frame, looking less like a mechanic than someone who had wandered in from another decade. Ethan Cole interpreted the silence as weakness. He guessed, Ethan said. Old aircraft, loose panel, lucky guess. Noah Bennett remained crouched beside the access plate. He slid a thin inspection card along the lower seam. It moved freely for 3 inches, then stopped where the forward washer pressed the metal outward. Captain, Noah said, the gap changes near the mount. Ethan stepped toward him. That does not prove a circuit failure. No, Walt said. It proves somebody trusted the torque reading more than the fit. Ethan turned sharply. You are not assigned to this unit. You are not listed as a civilian contractor. You have no current certification for this airframe. As far as I can tell, you walked onto an active flight line carrying a handwritten note. Walt finally looked at him. There was no challenge in his pale eyes, only an unsettling patience. Then read the note. Captain Maddox removed the folded paper from his pocket. The message carried the seal of the commanding general's office, but the words were brief. Admit Walter Mercer to Raven 27. Extend professional courtesy. Nothing explained who Walt was or why Major General Thomas Keane had sent for him. Ethan gave a dry laugh. Professional courtesy does not mean maintenance authority. I did not ask for authority, Walt said. You have been telling us how to repair the aircraft since you arrived. No. I have been telling you what she is saying. The distinction hung in the heat. Behind them, the countdown dropped to 27 minutes. Captain Maddox glanced toward the rescue crews waiting near the loading zone, then back at Walt. When did you last work on a Black Hawk? Ethan asked. His tone made the question sound like an accusation. Walt's attention returned to the aircraft. Long enough ago that the manuals were thinner. A few technicians exchanged smiles. Ethan folded his arms. That is not an answer. It is the one you earned. The smiles disappeared. For the first time, a trace of steel entered Walt's voice, quiet but unmistakable. Ethan stepped closer to the yellow line. This aircraft carries modern systems, updated wiring, and digital monitoring. Whatever you remember from 40 years ago does not make you qualified to touch it now. Walt studied him for a moment. The wiring changed. Electricity did. Not. Noah lowered his eyes to hide a reaction. Captain Maddox did not. A faint smile touched one corner of his mouth before pressure erased it. Enough, he said. Bennett, pull the maintenance history for that panel. Cole, verify the washer specification. Ethan remained still. Captain, we are wasting time. Then move faster. The technicians scattered toward their stations. Noah hurried to the portable terminal and entered the aircraft identification number. Walt stayed where he was, listening to the clicks of keyboards, the rattle of tools, and the distant rhythm of turning rotors. Ethan searched the illustrated parts record with sharp, irritated movements. After less than a minute, Noah's screen filled with entries. Most were routine. One was not. The panel was removed 3 days ago, Noah said. Rotor brake inspection. Ethan looked over. Performed by second shift. Noah opened the attached work order. The forward mounting washer was replaced. Captain Maddox stepped beside him. With what part? Noah read the number twice. His face changed. That is a flat washer. Ethan stopped typing. Noah looked toward the Black Hawk. The diagram calls for a beveled washer. Silence spread across the work area, broken only by the ticking countdown. Walt reached into his jacket to adjust the object in his pocket. The burned leather glove slipped free, struck the concrete, and skidded across the yellow line. It came to rest against Ethan's boot, blackened, stiff, and missing most of its index finger. Ethan bent down and lifted it by the cuff. "This," he said, turning it for the others to see, "is the expertise we are supposed to trust." Ethan held the glove at eye level as though it were evidence in a trial. The leather had once been dark brown, but heat had turned most of the palm black and glassy. The index finger was burned away almost to the second joint, and a pale line of old stitching crossed the cuff in an uneven arc. "This belongs in a display case," he said. "Or a trash bin." One of the technicians gave a nervous chuckle. Another looked down at his tools. Noah Bennett watched Walt instead. The old man had not moved, but the stillness around him had changed. His shoulders remained loose. His face remained calm. Only his eyes had narrowed, fixed on the glove in Ethan's hand. "Put it down," Walt said. The words were quiet. They carried farther than Ethan's laughter had. Ethan glanced at Captain Maddox, then back at Walt. "Why? Is it some kind of good luck charm?" "No," Walt stepped to the edge of the yellow line. "It is not luck." The wind pushed a thin ribbon of dust across the concrete. Somewhere beyond the maintenance bay, a helicopter lifted from another pad, and the low beat of its rotor rolled over the flight line. Ethan turned the glove over. "Then what is it?" Walt looked at the missing finger. For a moment, the sunlit tarmac seemed to fall away from him. The clean smell of hot concrete became wet canvas, fuel vapor, and rain carried sideways by rotor wash. A younger Walt stood beneath a dark sky beside a Black Hawk marked Raven 27. Warning lights flickered across the cockpit. Water ran from the edge of his helmet and down the collar of his flight suit. A voice crackled through his headset, thin beneath the storm. "Ash hand, leave it. We have to move." Walt remembered pressing the damaged glove against a hot access panel while the aircraft shuddered under electrical load. He remembered a pilot in the left seat, young and pale, refusing to abandon the rest of the crew. He remembered the second relay arriving late, exactly as it had today. The memory vanished with the sound of the glove creaking in Ethan's grip. Walt's gaze sharpened. "A man died while I was wearing that," he said. The nervous amusement disappeared. Even Ethan's expression faltered, but only for a second. "I am sorry," he said, though the words lacked warmth. "That still does not make it a diagnostic tool." "No," Walt replied. "It makes it something you do not mock." Captain Maddox stepped forward. "Cole, return it." Ethan hesitated, then crossed the yellow line and held the glove out. Walt did not take it immediately. His eyes settled on the stitching at the cuff. Noah noticed a faded set of letters stamped beneath the burn marks. Most were unreadable, but 3 remained clear. R27. "Captain," Noah said, "that glove has the aircraft number on it." Ethan looked down. Walt took the glove from him and folded it once with careful hands. "Aircraft numbers get reused," Ethan said. "Not this one," Walt answered. Captain Maddox's head turned toward the silent Black Hawk. The same white marking stood beneath the cockpit window. Raven 27. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. "You worked on this aircraft?" he asked. Walt slid the glove back into his pocket. "Not this frame." His eyes remained on the number. "The one that carried the name before it." Noah moved closer to the maintenance terminal. The restored designation was approved by General Keane. Ethan exhaled in frustration. "We are still 24 minutes from cancellation." He pointed toward the open panel. "Whatever history lesson this is, it does not change the procedure." Walt looked at the gap along the lower edge. "You are right." Ethan blinked, surprised. Walt continued. "History changes nothing unless somebody learns from it." Captain Maddox checked the countdown, then faced the crew. "Remove the lower fasteners. Leave the upper mounts in place." Ethan started to object. Maddox cut him off. We inspect the lead under load before we replace a $10,000 module that has not recorded a fault. Noah grabbed the correct tools. 2 technicians joined him. Ethan remained where he was, jaw tight, while Walt stepped back beyond the line. As the first bolt turned, a strip of brittle black insulation fell from behind the panel and landed on the concrete. It matched the residue Walt had found. Nobody laughed this time. Noah Bennett eased the lower edge of the panel outward while another technician held a flashlight against the opening. A brittle sleeve around the ground lead had cracked where the cable passed beside the rotor brake support. The copper beneath it was not exposed, but the insulation had hardened and pulled away from the clamp. Ethan Cole leaned closer, studying the damage. "That still does not prove an open circuit," he said. Walt Mercer watched from beyond the yellow line. "Not while the frame is resting." Captain Ryan Maddox checked the countdown. 22 minutes remained. "Can we test it under load?" Noah nodded. "Yes, sir, but somebody needs to monitor the lead while the start sequence runs." Ethan straightened. "I will do it." Walt's eyes moved to the narrow opening, then to Ethan's bare hands. "Not without protection." Ethan glanced toward the burned glove in Walt's pocket. "I have insulated gloves in the cart. Use them." The words were simple, but something in Walt's tone pulled the flight line backward through time. The white glare softened into a storm-dark evening. Rain hammered the skin of another Black Hawk carrying the same name. Raven 27 rested crooked on a remote landing strip, its rotor slowing beneath a sky without stars. Walt was 30 years old then, a maintenance chief with steady hands and a reputation for hearing faults before instruments found them. The crew had been ordered to leave the aircraft and wait for recovery at daylight. The young pilot in the left seat had refused. Lieutenant Thomas Keene kept looking toward the distant ridge, where weather was closing over the only safe route out. 8 people depended on that machine lifting before the valley disappeared beneath fog. Walt had opened the access panel and found a ground lead shifting against a bent support. Every time the airframe twisted under starter torque, the connection separated. The test equipment showed continuity. The helicopter remained silent. "Ash Hand, leave it," someone called through the rain. The nickname had begun as a joke years earlier after Walt repaired a heater with soot covering both hands. That night, it became something else. He pulled on his leather glove and pressed the cable against its mount while Keene turned the starter. The panel grew hot beneath Walt's palm. The glove darkened. Smoke curled from the missing index finger where the leather had worn thin. He held the connection steady and listened. First relay. Load shift. Second relay. Then the rising whine of the turbine cut through the rain. The Black Hawk woke. Walt did not celebrate. He kept his hand in place until the electrical system stabilized and every person was aboard. As the aircraft lifted, the ground fell away beneath sheets of water. Keene looked back from the cockpit and saw Walt sitting on the floor, the burned glove still wrapped around his hand. The memory loosened its grip. Fort Calder returned in sharp sunlight, with Noah crouched beside the open panel and Ethan pulling on modern insulated gloves. Walt touched the shape of the old leather through his jacket pocket. Captain Maddox raised one hand. "Prepare for another start." Noah attached a meter across the lead while Ethan held the cable near the damaged support. "Ready," Noah called. The cockpit technician turned the switch. The first relay snapped shut. The frame trembled. For an instant, the meter reading dropped almost to nothing. Ethan felt the cable shift beneath his fingers. The second relay arrived late, and the system died again. Noah stared at the display. The ground opened under load. Captain Maddox looked at Ethan. Ethan said nothing. The confidence in his face had drained into concentration. He examined the clamp, then the incorrect flat washer pressing the panel against the support. "The washer changed the angle," he said quietly. "When the frame twists, the bracket pulls the lead away." Walt nodded. Now you are listening. Noah glanced at the old man. You have seen this exact failure before. Walt looked toward the number beneath the cockpit window. Once. His voice had gone distant. Captain Maddox followed his gaze. On the original Raven 27? Walt did not answer. He did not need to. Noah looked at the burned glove hidden inside the field jacket, then at the scarred hand resting beside it. A faded memory surfaced from a maintenance history lecture he had heard during training. A stranded aircraft. A crew carried out through impossible weather. A mechanic whose name had been removed from most public reports. Noah stepped away from the others and pulled out his phone. Where are you going? Ethan asked. To verify something. Noah moved behind the equipment cart, searched the base directory, and found the number for the commanding general's aide. When the line opened, he lowered his voice. This is Specialist Bennett on the Raven 27 flight line. I need to ask about a man named Walter Mercer. The aide hesitated. Noah looked toward Walt and added 2 words. Ash hand. The silence on the other end changed completely. The aide did not ask Noah to repeat the name. His voice dropped from routine professionalism to something much sharper. Stay where you are. Do not let anyone remove that man from the flight line. Noah glanced toward Captain Ryan Maddox, who was studying the damaged lead with Ethan Cole. Sir, they are about to pull the aircraft into the hangar. Then stop them. The line clicked, followed by another voice entering the call. Specialist Bennett, this is Colonel Avery from the Commanding General's staff. Tell me exactly what you saw. Noah looked at Walt Mercer standing beyond the yellow line, his weathered face turned toward Raven 27. A burned flight glove. The cuff is marked with the old aircraft number. He identified the ground failure before the test equipment did. Colonel Avery was silent for less than a second. Did he give you a call sign? Noah tightened his grip on the phone. Ash hand. The silence that followed felt heavier than any answer. Across the base, in a conference room above operations, Major General Thomas Keane stopped speaking in the middle of a briefing. Colonel Avery had entered without knocking and placed a phone beside the general's folder. Keane stared at the name written on the screen. Walter Mercer. For years, it had existed in old reports, private letters, and one memory he never allowed to fade. Then Colonel Avery showed him the photograph Noah had sent. The glove lay blackened against sunlit concrete, the pale stitching at its cuff still visible. General Keane rose so quickly that his chair rolled backward. Where is he? Raven 27 flight line, sir. Who authorized maintenance without calling me? Captain Maddox is in charge. The technicians appear ready to tow the aircraft. Keane reached for his uniform coat. Call the tower. Freeze movement around that pad. No towing, no engine transport, no maintenance action until I arrive. Back on the flight line, the countdown showed 18 minutes. Ethan closed the inspection cover loosely and stood. We found the failure point. We can replace the lead in the hangar and return the aircraft tomorrow. Captain Maddox looked toward the rescue teams waiting in the heat. Tomorrow does not save tonight's exercise. Neither does improvising on an active aircraft. Ethan pointed toward the support bracket. The proper replacement requires access we do not have out here. Walt stepped closer to the line. The lead does not need replacement. Ethan turned. The insulation is failing. The sleeve is failing. The conductor is sound. And your solution is what? Hold it in place with that glove. The old contempt returned, thinner now but still present. Walt did not react. Remove the flat washer. Install the correct beveled one. Reset the clamp by 1/8 of an inch. The load will pull the lead inward instead of away. Noah ended the call and hurried back. Captain, we cannot tow the aircraft. Maddox frowned. Why not? Before Noah could answer, the tower frequency crackled through the nearby radio. Raven 27 maintenance, be advised, all movement on your pad is suspended by order of Major General Keene. Every head turned toward the speaker. Ethan's face hardened. On what grounds? Noah looked at Walt. On his. Walt lowered his eyes for a moment, as though the attention weighed more than the years. Captain Maddox stepped toward Noah. What did you tell them? His name. The glove. The call sign. Maddox looked back at Walt. Ash hand. The old man gave no answer. Far beyond the hangars, a black staff vehicle turned onto the service road, followed by two more. Their lights flashed against the heat haze. The convoy moved fast. Ethan watched it approach, then looked down at the dead Black Hawk and the loosened panel. For the first time all afternoon, he seemed unsure whether the greater mistake had been ignoring the aircraft or ignoring the man who understood it. Walt reached into his pocket and pulled out the burned glove. He ran one thumb across the scorched cuff. You have 16 minutes, he said. Use them wisely. The convoy crossed the last stretch of concrete and stopped beside the maintenance bay. Doors opened almost together. Colonel Avery stepped out first, followed by two aides, but Major General Thomas. Keene was already moving before either man could reach him. He crossed the flight line with a speed that seemed out of place for someone wearing 2 stars, his eyes fixed on Walt Mercer. Captain Ryan Maddox snapped to attention. Ethan Cole followed half a second later. Noah Bennett stood beside the open panel, still holding the inspection meter. Walt remained beyond the yellow line. He did not straighten. He did not salute. He simply watched the general approach with the same quiet expression he had worn all afternoon. Keene stopped 6 feet away. For a moment, Rank disappeared from the scene. There was only an older pilot looking at the man who had once refused to leave him behind. Keene's gaze dropped to the burned glove in Walt's hand. The blackened palm, the missing finger, and the pale stitching at the cuff had survived years better than either of them had expected. You kept it, Keene said. Walt looked down at the glove. It still works. A faint breath of laughter escaped the general, but it carried no amusement. It carried memory. Then Keene raised his hand and saluted. Every technician on the pad went still. The gesture was not ceremonial. It was personal. Walt waited 1 beat before returning it. His movement was slower, but no less precise. Ethan stared at them, the last trace of confidence leaving his face. Keene lowered his hand and turned toward the crew. Who laughed at that glove? Nobody answered. Walt spoke before the silence could become punishment. Does not matter. Keene looked at him. It matters to me. Then let it matter after the aircraft flies. The general studied Walt, then nodded. He faced Captain Maddox. Status. Maddox answered without hesitation. Intermittent ground loss under starter load. Incorrect washer changed the panel angle and shifted the lead near the rotor brake support. Mr. Mercer identified it before confirmation. Keene's eyes moved to Ethan. And your recommendation? Ethan swallowed. Replace the control module, sir. Did the module record a fault? No, sir. Did the aircraft tell you where to look? Ethan glanced toward Walt. Yes, sir. I did not understand what I was hearing. Keene stepped beside the open panel. That is why he is here. He turned to the crew. 41 years ago, the first aircraft to carry this designation lost the same ground path during a weather evacuation. Lieutenant Keene was in the left seat. A few heads turned toward him. Keene continued, his voice level. 8 people were waiting for that aircraft to lift. Recovery was hours away. Weather was minutes away. Walter Mercer found the fault by sound, held the connection steady, and kept the electrical system alive until everyone was aboard. He looked at the glove. The panel burned through the leather while he worked. Ethan's eyes fell to Walt's scarred right hand. Keane did not describe more. He did not need to. The glove said enough. The countdown clock changed to 14 minutes. Walt crossed the yellow line for the first time. "Correct beveled washer," he said. Noah opened the parts case and found one sealed in a clear envelope. "Here. Reset the clamp inward by 1/8 of an inch. Do not over-tighten it." Ethan reached for the tools, then paused. "Mr. Mercer." Walt looked at him. Ethan held out the wrench. "Show me." Walt did not smile, but something in his face softened. "Watch the cable, not my hands." The team gathered close as he knelt beside Raven 27. General Keane stepped back into the heat and let the old mechanic take command without giving a single order. On that flight line, authority had stopped belonging to rank. It belonged to the man who knew how to listen. Walt knelt beside the open panel while the countdown fell to 13 minutes. Noah Bennett placed the beveled washer in his palm, and Ethan Cole held the flashlight steady. Up close, the difference between the two parts seemed almost meaningless. The flat washer was clean, polished, and technically secure. The beveled washer was slightly thicker on one edge, designed to pull the bracket inward as the fastener tightened. Walt held them side by side. "This one locks the panel," he said, touching the flat washer. "This one guides the load." Ethan leaned closer. "The wrong part passed torque inspection. Torque tells you how tight something is. It does not tell you where the force goes." Walt removed the forward fastener with 2 slow turns, supporting the bracket with his other hand. The brittle sleeve shifted, and a faint line of black dust fell onto the concrete. He did not rush. Around him, the rescue crews waited beneath the lowering sun, and the Black Hawk stood silent with its rotor blades casting long shadows across the pad. Major General Thomas Keane watched from several yards away. He had seen Walt work under pressure before. Age had slowed the man's movements, but it had not changed their precision. Every touch had a reason. Walt placed the beveled washer against the mount and rotated it until the thicker edge faced the cable. "Noah, lift the lead 1/4 of an inch." Noah followed the instruction. "Ethan, move the clamp inward." Ethan adjusted it carefully. "How far?" "Until the cable rests without being pulled." Ethan shifted it by less than 1/8 of an inch. The ground lead settled into a natural curve instead of pressing against the brake support. Walt nodded. "There." Ethan tightened the fastener. "Torque specification." "Use the manual." The answer surprised him. Walt looked up. "Experience does not replace procedure. It tells you when procedure has been followed without understanding." Ethan entered the proper value on the digital wrench and tightened the bolt until the tool gave a clean tone. Noah inspected the sleeve. "The conductor is stable." "Check it under movement," Walt said. Captain Ryan Maddox ordered 2 technicians to rock the fuselage gently from the approved points while Noah watched the meter. The reading held steady. They repeated the test. No drop. No delay. Ethan stared at the numbers, then looked toward the control module he had wanted to replace. It sat untouched in its padded case. "We would have changed a good component," he said. Walt closed the panel halfway. And the aircraft would still be silent. The countdown reached 9 minutes. Maddox turned toward Walt. "Are we ready for a start?" Walt examined the lower seam. The panel now sat flush from front to back, the steel glare unbroken. "Almost." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the burned glove. The technicians watched as he slid it over his scarred right hand. The missing index finger left part of his hand exposed, but the blackened leather still fit as though it had never belonged anywhere else. Ethan looked at it differently now. Not as damaged equipment. Not as an old man's keepsake. As a record of a lesson earned where no classroom could teach it. Walt pressed his gloved palm against the panel. Rock the frame again. The technicians complied. He closed his eyes, feeling the movement travel through metal, bracket, and cable. Nothing shifted. No false vibration reached his hand. He opened his eyes. Secure it. Noah tightened the remaining fasteners while Ethan checked each one behind him. General Keane stepped closer. You used that same method the first time. Walt rose carefully. Did not have a meter then. You did not have 9 minutes either. Walt glanced at the countdown. We had less. Captain Maddox signaled the waiting flight crew. A pilot and co-pilot hurried toward the aircraft with helmets in hand. Ethan began gathering his tools, but Walt stopped him. Leave the laptop connected. Ethan looked puzzled. You said the computer missed the fault. It did. Walt turned toward the cockpit. Now let it confirm the repair. Noah smiled for the first time all afternoon. The crew climbed aboard. External power disconnected. The pad cleared. Walt walked toward the open cockpit door, the burned glove resting against his side. Ethan called after him. Mr. Mercer, who should perform the start? Walt placed one boot on the step and looked back at the technicians gathered beneath the motionless rotor. Someone who knows what the first click means. Then he climbed into Raven 27 as the countdown reached 7 minutes. Walt settled into the right seat while the assigned pilot remained at the controls on the left. The cockpit smelled of warm electronics, hydraulic fluid, and sun-heated canvas. Through the open door, he could see Captain Ryan Maddox standing beside Major General Thomas Keane, Noah Bennett near the connected laptop, and Ethan Cole watching the repaired panel as though it might still prove him right. The countdown showed 6 minutes. Walt rested his burned glove against his knee and studied the instrument panel. The displays glowed with clean green indications. No warning light told the story of the cable that had shifted less than 1/8 of an inch. No fault code recorded the moment the airframe twisted and the ground path vanished. Machines remembered results. They did not always remember causes. External area clear, the pilot said. Noah raised one hand from beside the laptop. Diagnostic link active. Ground circuit stable. Walt looked through the windshield at the long shadow of the rotor stretching over the concrete. For an instant, another sky appeared in the glass. Rain. Darkness. A younger Thomas Keane in the left seat. 8 people waiting for a silent aircraft to become their way home. Then the reflection passed, and Fort Calder returned beneath the late afternoon sun. General Keane lifted his chin once. Walt placed his exposed index finger on the starter control. The rest of his hand remained covered by the blackened leather. Ready? The pilot asked. Walt listened to the silence around the aircraft. She is. He turned the switch. The first relay closed with a firm metallic click. The sound traveled through the frame and into his palm. A heartbeat later, the second relay answered exactly on time. The starter engaged. A rising mechanical whine filled the cockpit, low at first, then smooth and certain. Outside, Noah stared at the laptop as the ground reading held steady under load. Ethan stepped closer to the yellow line. The turbine caught. Its voice sharpened. One rotor blade moved, then another, slowly sweeping through the sunlight. Dust lifted from the concrete in pale circles. Jackets snapped in the growing wind. The Black Hawk had not been forced awake. It had simply been given back the connection it needed. The rotor gathered speed until its separate blades became a dark turning disk above the fuselage. Captain Maddox looked at the countdown. 4 minutes remained. The rescue crews began moving toward the loading zone. Noah turned the laptop so Ethan could see the screen. All systems normal. No recorded fault. Ethan read the message twice. Hours of testing had produced nothing. Walt had needed a delay. Between 2 clicks, a strip of black dust, and a gap nearly too small to see. The engine settled into a steady rhythm that rolled across the flight line and echoed from the hangars. Walt removed his hand from the control. The pilot looked toward him. That was one touch. Walt glanced at the repaired panel outside his window. It was 41 years of listening. He climbed down as the crew completed the remaining checks. Rotor Wash pressed his field jacket against his back. General Keane met him beneath the edge of the turning blades. "You brought her back again," Keane said. Walt shook his head. "Your technicians did. They just needed to look in the right place." Ethan approached with his safety glasses in one hand. The arrogance was gone from his posture. "Mr. Mercer, I was wrong." Walt waited. Ethan looked at the burned glove. "Not about the value of procedure. About believing procedure was the same thing as understanding." Walt nodded once. "That is a mistake good technicians survive only if they admit it." Ethan held out his hand. Walt looked at it, then accepted. There was no triumph in the gesture. Only a lesson passed from one generation to another. Noah called from the equipment cart. "Captain, Raven 27 is cleared." Maddox signaled the rescue team forward. General Keane watched Walt fold the damaged glove and return it to his pocket. "The base museum still has a place for that," he said. "Not yet." "Why not?" Walt looked toward the Black Hawk as its cabin filled and the doors closed. "It still has work to do." Moments later, Raven 27 lifted from the pad. The aircraft climbed into the copper light, carrying its crew toward the waiting exercise while everyone below stood in the wind it left behind. Technology had preserved the data. The burned glove had preserved the cost.